We're thrilled that you are joining us for our annual Early Childhood Summit. Today, we are focusing on supporting today's workforce for tomorrow. So we're going to spend a good chunk of the time talking about our early childhood workforce, and then we're also going to talk about how our early childhood workforce supports the entire workforce and the entire Texas economy. A few housekeeping things. Keep an eye on the chat. Our children at risk technicians will be putting in agendas and links to the speakers' bios, etc. Use the chat box for questions and answers. If you need technical assistance, just put it in the chat and one of them will assist you. We are doing a Zoom meeting versus a Zoom webinar, which will allow us to do some breakout rooms a little bit later. But because of that, we just want to make sure everyone remembers to put yourself on mute because we have a jam-packed agenda over the next couple of hours. The breakout rooms will give us great opportunities to take yourself off mute and actually ask questions to some of our panelists. So we're excited about that piece. Let's see, what else do I have? I think those are my housekeepings. We want to thank our sponsor, Amazon. With their support, we are able to provide these free of charge across the calendar year. And so we are thrilled for you to be here with us throughout the day today. And it is 9:30, so we are going to start specifically on time. I know more people will be joining us, but I would like to get started because our first guest is a very busy woman. Texas Representative Angie Chin Button is going to give us our opening remarks. Representative Button is the state representative for House District 112, which is up in the Dallas area community. And she currently serves as chair of the International Relations and Economic Development Committee and a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Representative Button worked at Texas Instruments before, where she promoted American products internationally and is an international marketing manager. And she has a CPA and with a master's degree in public finance and management sciences. Representative Button, we are so thrilled that you are here today and have given us our opening remarks. I know you have a busy week, and so I'm going to turn it over to you for a few minutes and give us greetings.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everyone. I am just absolutely excited to be here. Now, the main reason is that I get to open today's Children at Risk, the annual Early Childhood Summit. What an honor. Second, let me share a little bit a personal story. Actually, I have been down for several days. You all know what's going on in our nation now, the hate crime, everything. Even in Dallas, my own community, it just really make you feel like, why on earth there's so much hatred? Can we just be happy to work together? It really bothers me. So I was exchanging the text messages with the pastors, with the community leaders, try to get myself live up so I can do more, okay? Then last night, my grandson, now even 3 years old, and well, you know, grandma usually like to brag about how smart their kids are, but my 3 years old, no, 2.5 years old, my son said, Remy, sing a song to your grandma. She looks like she needs some cheer up. She's kind of burned out a little bit. So this little boy, he started singing, we all live in a yellow submarine. Yellow submarine, oh no, blue submarine, blue submarine. I said, oh, how did you know this is one of my favorite songs? And how come you sing a blue submarine? So he took out his little plastic toy. It's blue submarine. Then I thought, wow, my grandson must be a genius. So cheer me up. I'm so happy. Okay. The reason I'm saying this, in addition to because I'm a wonderful grandma, like to brag about it, is That says a lot about what you are working. Very challenging environment because you're working with at-risk children. But it is so important. Imagine that even for the regular kid like my grandson can learn so much from a good environment, and the kids facing the challenging life, especially in their early childhood, you are the ones I need to take off my hat and show my respect and tell you, congratulations. You are working on the most important thing in the world is to bring up hopes and also the intelligence development for the young kids, especially at risk. So thank you for doing that. So let me also get back to, I'm the lucky girl, okay? The Texas Monthly gave me the one of the top 10 outstanding legislator award, and the Early Childhood Education Association gave me the elected official of the year. I can go on, but did I get all those honors on my own? No. It's because I have wonderful colleagues, bipartisan colleagues, work together, and because advocate organizations like your come to our office and bring us up to what's going on. I have a long list of the bills I'm going to go through, but I'm not going to do that because my husband already signaled me I'm kind of over my time, and he mentioned you have a busy schedule. But I want you to know how important you are working now. And this is the hope for our world. When you think about what's going on, it will really bring you down in this environment now. But when you think about you are helping those kids, especially the one need extra attention, extra help to bring this world a better place for the future. Hey, listen, that is something very, very rewarding. And tomorrow, 6 o'clock, I am going to leave my house, take the flight to Austin to continue my second international relations and workforce development interim charge, and to look at all the child care related bills, what they are doing. Are they having difficulties? What we can do to help out? And I think you would like to hear that. And let me close my, not that short talk, but definitely very important talk, which I brag about it many, many times, but I'm not gonna be shy because I'm going to brag about this again. The child development is not just a family issue. It's not just a child issue. It is the workforce development issue. And you're out there trying to make sure there are more qualified, enthusiastic people join this profession. So this is an economic issue for our entire state of Texas. Again, let me salute to you and have a wonderful summit. And I am here to support you. Well, I think I'm going to tell my grandson this story. See what he thinks. His grandma's doing something good. And thank you for having me. And Kim, you can take the stage back. Y'all have a wonderful, wonderful day. And you can tell I am very happy now because early childhood development is the most important thing. You can make a difference and keep you fulfilled and happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Button. I think we will all have a blue submarine in our heads the rest of the day with a great story like that. We thank you for your leadership and your steadfastness on these issues, and applaud your work, and look forward to continuing to work with you in this next legislative session, and we'll see you tomorrow at the hearing. So, all right, well, we're gonna shift gears and kind of set the stage and kind of get into some data, which is what we like to do here at Children at Risk. So I'm going to share a few slides with you about some work that we have done over the last 6 months or so, and then we'll get into our panelists and our breakout rooms. So we are looking, so last year we had a grant for through the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to look at some early childhood issues with the race equity lens. And so as we were doing our plans and figuring out what that would be, we decided we would do two things. We would do a series of focus groups with providers across the state, both who participated in Texas Rising Star and who did not participate in Texas Rising Star, and really look at why providers, both white providers and providers of color, chose to participate or not to participate, and what kind of barriers there may exist that we may or may not have been aware of. We released that report in April. It was called the Quest for Equity and Quality, Examining Provider Experiences and Participation in Texas Rising Star. So if you want to go read that report, I encourage you to do so. Many of you joined us in April for our mini events to dig deep into that. But today I want to talk about the second thing that we did, which was really we did an early childhood survey last fall, where we asked providers to give us a little bit of information. Of course, we asked the demographic questions, questions about education level, barriers to continuing education, salaries, benefit levels, etc. But we also asked questions about racial and cultural experiences, as well as questions about any experiences related to their gender and related to their work. And so we're going to take a few moments today to dig into that data and look at that workforce. Bree, can you advance next slide? So that first, there you go. Thank you. So we're first going to look at the, so when we ask those questions about relating to the experience of gender and racial discrimination at work, we had about 28% of our respondents said yes, that they have experienced some form of that. And out of that, 79% of those were providers of color. So what did they actually say? Go ahead, Bree. So when we asked those questions, we gave them a series of different things to choose from, and these were the top three. So the top three were earned less than a coworker who was doing the same job based on race, ethnicity, or gender, been denied a promotion because of race, ethnicity, or gender, or had someone treat you that you were not competent because of your race, gender, or race, ethnicity, or gender. And so when we think about those top three, and that we had a good portion of the respondents identify that they've had those experiences, it gives us pause to make us really think about, when we build and support our early childhood workforce, we have to think about it in a holistic way. We have to think about what systems and barriers are there already that we need to really think about to make sure that we're giving everyone in that workforce space a holistic point of view. We have to know what the ECE workforce's experience, what providers of color are experiencing. We have to ask the questions. We have to be able to listen to those stories and experiences. So as we build or potentially rebuild those systems, those early childhood systems, we have to be inclusive of all those experiences, and making sure that we are thinking about it in a very holistic way. So part of those experiences have to do with our early childhood workforce education piece. So when we look at that piece, which is on the next slide, we asked the questions of their education level, and 54% of our respondents identified that they only have a high school diploma or a GED. So when we think about that, when we think about our workforce across the board, and granted, this was a one-time survey and it wasn't representative of everybody, but it still gives us a great picture into really where our workforce is at. We know that 70% of those worked in centers. The age groups were between 25 and 54. 50% of those were assistant directors or directors, and the other 50% were educators, and just over slightly 60% worked in the Texas Rising Star system. And so when we think about 50% of our educators only having a high school degree, the question then becomes why? What are the barriers preventing EC educators from going back to school? And what can we do about it? So when we go to the next slide, we look at, there's no real surprise. And if I didn't show you this slide and asked you just to name the top 3 reasons, those top 3 would come out: time, salary, and finances. I can't afford to go back to school. I don't make enough money. It's not going to advance. If I get a degree, I'm not going to make that much more. So why should I do it? All those are things that are true and legit and are good reasons, right? But I want to spend a little time today to think about those things that are in red, that really tell us the rest of the story and what are those rest of those barriers that might exist in our system that we need to think about and be aware of. So childcare, a lot of our workforce are parents themselves. If you think about that age group from 25 to 54, they're in the midst of parenting right now. They also might be in the midst of care for their elderly parents. So how do we set up those systems that we think about when we're asking people to go back to school, or when they want to go back to school? Are we giving them the supports they really need besides just the scholarships and those supports, which are so needed and so appreciative? But how do we look at that holistically? Interest, no matter what our external pushes are for educators to go back to school, how do we build that internal interest to go back to school and get that done? It has to be something I want to do in order to make that commitment. Family support is another one, which may include childcare, but it may just be the family support through the journey of education. We know our workforce is majority women. We know they carry a lot of the household duties. So how do I have that family support to go back? A lot of them are single mothers. So how do we do that thinking in a very holistic way? Technology is no surprise. In fact, we saw this, the pandemic gave us a first example, a great example of this. I remember early on in the pandemic, as everybody was going back, shifting to online, we had an educator tell us she was going back to school, but was sharing one computer with her 5 children who were also trying to do school online, and who's taking turns of that piece. So it's the equipment, but it's also then the bandwidth, making sure that we have connections and good internet to be able to do online. And then it's also the availability of those online classes. The pandemic has given us a shot in the arm to improve a lot of those things. So how do we maintain and how do we really think about that as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully, that we really are able to provide those things. And the last thing is really that administrative support. We need the family supports, we need those things at home, but we also need that ability and that confidence within our workplace to also go back to school and that support for them. So we are going to, so when we think about the system of supporting our early childhood workforce, thinking about that holistically of how do we build that pipeline, how do we work on higher ed, and making sure those systems are in place and are supportive of our educators, and then as well as compensation. What is it going to make worth my while to go back to school and get those educations? And so our next panelists are going to lead us in some conversations around those things right now. I'm going to turn the reins over to my colleague, Makia Thomas, who's a staff here, my associate director here at Children at Risk. Makia, I'll turn it over to you so you can introduce your panelists and take us from here.
All right, thank you so much for that, Kim, and good morning, everybody. And I really appreciate that overview, Kim. There's so much data out there that really highlights those existing barriers, and I think, and the impact that they have. And I think it's really important that we reflect on those and really use those to serve as a driver for where do we go next, and how do we really create that equitable and inclusive system that dismantles those pervasive barriers that exist for our workforce. And I'm excited because that's why we're here today, to have this conversation. And I am joined by like 3 amazing experts that are really going to speak to their areas of expertise. And first, I'd like to introduce joining me today, I have Cody Somerville. He's currently the Executive Director of the Texas Association for the Education of Young Children. I'm also joined by Krista Olson. She is the Research and Policy Associate at the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley. And I'm also joined by Marika Cox-Mitchell, and she is currently the Senior Director of Early Learning at the Bainham Foundation. So just super excited all three of you are here. Cody's really gonna tell us a lot about higher education and articulation. Chris is going to really dive into compensation, and Marika is really going to speak to building out the pipeline. And lucky enough today, they're actually going to do 3 breakout sessions that will be recorded for you. So you get to choose one during this morning, but at a later date, a recording will be sent out to you. But I'm ready to really dig in into this conversation. And to kick things off, I'm going to go to you, Marika, if you're ready. And kind of tell us a little bit. I know Kim highlighted what's happening from the study that we did last fall, but where do you see the state of the early childhood education workforce, and then what factors have been at play and have really served as a significant role in where we are today?
Thank you so much, Makia, and thank you to Children at Risk for having me be a part of this really important conversation. In many ways, you've recognized that children are at risk when the workforce supporting their development is at risk. To be honest, the state of the early childhood education workforce today isn't that much different from the state of early childhood educators before. Early childhood educators are underpaid, unprepared, and unsupported. And the data Kim shared certainly made that clear. Early childhood educators make subpar wages. And in fact, there is a wage penalty for joining this noble profession. Early childhood educators do not have the level of preparation they need to be effective. Again, the data Kim shared highlighted that. And I think the sad thing about that status is that educators do want degrees and credentials in early childhood education. It just needs to make sense and sense. And right now, it's not making sense for them and sense. Early childhood educators also work under very harsh conditions and are expected to endure these conditions because they have passion. They're essentially sacrificing their own well-being to do this work. And so all of those reasons why, again, the status of the early childhood education workforce is sort of underpaid, unprepared, and unsupported. And I'll say the key factors contributing to this condition is the lack of public funding to pay for the real cost of high quality early childhood education. We do not fund early childhood education as the public good that it is. We ask families and the workforce to carry the burden, but at the same time, society reaps the benefit. So the math doesn't add up, or as the TikTokers would say, the early childhood math ain't mathin'. I think part of it is also, and this is where I turn the mirror on ourselves, we also lack clarity as a profession. We are unwilling to make tough decisions that are necessary to advance as an organized and recognized profession. And no one's going to do that work for us. The field needs to be better organized and more coherent, and I'll certainly get into that later. And the last one I would say is the lack of courage to examine and name the sexist, elitist, and racist mindsets that have us here. And these often hidden isms is actually what's holding this problem in place. And so, again, we're underpaid, unprepared, and unsupported.
Really appreciate those words. You said those isms, the mathin', all of those things. I think it was perfect as far as a perfect segue to us diving in and kind of having a little conversation around compensation. And Krista, here in Texas and really everywhere, there's over the last few years, there's been a lot of federal dollars coming in, and our very own Texas Workforce Commission has really done a great job, leading that effort and ensuring that program stabilization has been a priority. They've even allocated an additional $1 billion and really emphasized that they want these these funds to be used for compensation and retention strategies. But we know that these funds it's a one-time deal, right? So really thinking about this, it's one time, where can we go from here? And how do we reimagine compensation in our field?
Thank you, Makia. And of course, the number one piece that we need, obviously, is sustained public funding coming from the federal government. And to echo Marika, early childhood education just needs to be funded as a public good. But with what we have now, and with current federal relief funds, states can allocate funds to providers that can increase educator wages, provide benefits such as paid sick leave, health insurance, and retirement. And there's also an opportunity to write into legislation recommendations, incentives, or requirements to use these public funds towards meaningful compensation strategies, as you see with the recent investment in Texas. But states don't have to wait for federal funding to make progress. So DC, for example, and I'll talk about this more in the breakout room, but they raise local funds through taxes to support an initiative that aims to get educator wages at parity with elementary school teachers. So that's an ongoing effort. And then there also is a piece of legislation that is about benefits that they haven't figured out how to fund yet, but it's written into the legislation. So that's ongoing work I encourage you to take a look at and stay abreast of. And then another action states can take are in developing salary scales. And if a state's already developed a salary scale, make sure that that's incorporated into some sort of recommendation, actually using the salary scale. And it's ideal if the lowest level at the salary scale is set, for example, at a living wage instead of a minimum wage as a start. And then finally, we just need to make sure that educators who work in different settings are an integral part of the policymaking process, so that educators themselves, they need to be at the table when decisions are being made about how to allocate funds for their compensation.
Thank you for that, Krista. At that last point, especially ensuring that the educators themselves are a part of the conversation. And it really, I like the example that you gave with DC on that pay parity and then the salary scale, that conversation just throughout. So definitely some things to highlight there. Cody, I'm going to you. We heard about the barriers. We've talked a little bit about compensation. And now I want to really look at the higher ed lens. Texas AYC has really housed the Teach Scholarship Program for early educators for over a decade now. And could you tell us a little bit more about what are those barriers for educators seeking to get their associate or bachelor degrees in the field?
Happy to, Makia, and thank you so much, Children at Risk, for hosting this event today. The challenges are varied and are great when it comes to early childhood educators accessing higher education. And part of the underlying issues is that higher ed is not built for working students, and most of our early childhood educators are working full-time while also pursuing their education. And there are only so many hours in a day, when a bulk of those are spent caring for children, and then you have to go home and care for your own family, and then you have to find the time to attend class, to complete your assignments. Time quickly becomes a really big challenge. There's also just so many barriers along the way. Not only is kind of the availability of online programs lacking, and the availability of courses, at times convenient to working professionals. There is so much in early childhood because our workforce is primarily made up of individuals who may be first-time or first-generation college students and their family. And as Marika eloquently laid out, there's so many structural barriers in our system and that are meant to use the isms to keep the system the way it is. And so when we think about supporting our early childhood educators as they advance their level of education, we have to think holistically about the supports that are provided. And our Teach Scholarship Program is a comprehensive scholarship program that recognizes individuals need more than funding for tuition and books in order to be successful. Things like travel stipends to get to class, being reimbursed for technology, because you might need another laptop, so you're not having to share it with your 5 children who are also trying to attend online classes. And then recognizing that there's just a lot of odd things in higher ed the way it is built, and there needs to be a lot of navigation support and cheerleading along the way to help connect early childhood educators to all the resources that are available on campuses. But one of the really large challenges here in Texas is the way articulation is handled in our state. As we think about creating pathways that result in a bachelor's degree, which can then lead to increased compensation for early childhood educators, we need student-centered articulation pathways that are flexible and that recognize the strength of our community colleges and the associated applied science and child development that many of our early childhood educators are obtaining. And right now, articulation has to be hashed out institution to institution here in Texas. We take local control very seriously. And for those of you who aren't quite aware of all the articulation challenges here across the state, when we think about a university system like the University of Texas system or the University of or Texas A&M University system, each of those systems has their multiple institutions, and in each of those institutions, they have different degree plans for the same degree. So that does not allow for our community colleges to create articulation agreements at the systems level. That really has to be institution to institution, which limits an individual early childhood educator's choice as they think about their pathways. They're often locked into where they can go next based off of where those articulation agreements are. But those institutions that are on the receiving institutions with those articulation agreements may not have the programs that best align with the needs of that particular early childhood educator. And often those programs aren't accepting all of the credits that were earned in an associate's degree, requiring duplication of coursework, adding additional expenses to early childhood educators who already don't have the funds to pay for higher ed. And it's creating a lot of a burden on early childhood educators, and is also wasting a whole lot of money that could be spent on things like compensation and education supports for early childhood educators.
Thank you so much for that, Cody. And I'm just going to say kudos to Cody. He is really leading the charge on making statewide change on articulation. So definitely feel free to jump into his breakout. I'm going to quickly shift a little bit over to you, Marika. So a lot of these barriers we've been talking about, compensation, higher ed, articulation, just what the pathways look like right now, have already existed prior to the pandemic. But then, of course, the pandemic just kind of blew it up even more. So we have educators leaving at record rates. Here in Texas, we had lost about 20% of our childcare capacity. Providers have closed their doors. How do we shift the narrative of our field? And then really, how do we build that sustainable pipeline for our workforce?
Yeah, you're right. I think it requires some narrative shifting, right? It requires internal work as a profession and external work. And I'll park the external work for a bit because frankly, I think sometimes it's easier to focus on others than it is to focus on ourselves. So internally, I would say we need more clarity and coherence to attract the level of public investments we need and to attract the competent early childhood educators we want. We have too many conflicting regulations and identities, and this level of incoherence makes it really difficult to make a clear case for compensation and frankly, the need for higher ed. Depending on where an early childhood educator works in Texas, anything between a 24-hour training certificate to a bachelor's degree will do. This is too wide of a window, and the variation is just too much, and the incentives to obtain higher levels of preparation are too little. So I think we need to first create a more unifying regulatory framework that clearly delineates required levels of preparation for each role in the profession, and ensuring that compensation increases as preparation in the roles in the field increases. We currently don't have that. And while our career lattices serve as a guide to help educators map out their journey in the profession, as you climb each level in the pathway or the guide, your role doesn't change significantly, nor does your salary. Unlike other professions, where when you obtain a credential, you can become a CNA, you attain higher credentials, you can move into a completely different role, like an LPN, you gain more competencies and work experience, your role significantly changes, you become an RN, for example. So we need that level of clarity and coherence. I mean, if anyone walks into this virtual space right now and asks, what do I need to be an early childhood educator in Texas? I bet they'll receive at least 7 conflicting answers. And I'm being quite generous with the 7. And so we also need to be clear about what the work of early childhood educators entails. It is intellectually complex, and that part is often hidden. It is physically draining. Families saw that when they had to stay home with their children, and emotionally heavy. And some of the language we use, as you talk about narrative, Makia, some of the language we use to define this profession just does not convey that level of complexity. Our policies refer to early childhood educators as caregivers and providers. I mean, and certainly they are, but that's not the totality of their practice. Firefighters, nurses, speech pathologists are caregivers, but we don't call them that. So all to say, to attract and retain a competent workforce and address the compensation issue, even the pathway issue, or the articulation issue, we need clarity and more public funding. And we also need just professional prestige and better working conditions. Because I think what we're seeing with the K-12 system is that higher compensation by itself isn't the singular formula for retention. So we also have to look at the working conditions and the professional prestige. So certainly the public has to step up, the federal government has to step up, policymakers have to step up, but the field also has some work to do.
Thank you for that, Marika. I am not going to comment because I have 2 more things I need to ask Cody and Krista. So Cody, if you could just really quickly tell us a little bit about, Marika brought up the Unifying framework. How does that tie into articulation? And then just speak to that a little bit.
Certainly. So the Unifying framework for the early childhood profession lays out 3 levels of early childhood educators with defined scopes of practice and age groups for which they can serve in different roles. And those 3 levels of educators correspond with a certificate that has 120 hours of preparation. There's an Educator 2, which has at least an associate's degree, and an Educator 3 that has a bachelor's degree. As Marika alluded to kind of the parallels in the nursing profession, there is pathways and there is increased responsibilities. There is different type of work as you increase your level of education. And the Unifying framework lays out those pathways, but those pathways have to be achievable. They have to be stackable. You have to be able to move from a level 2 to a level 3 easily. And right now in Texas, as I spoke about earlier, articulation pathways are not student-centered, and they're often not meaningful pathways either. If only half of your credits are accepted, or if they're going to accept all of your credits, but all of your child development coursework at the associate's level counts as an elective, and you have to redo all the coursework at the bachelor's level, it's not a true student-centered pathway that is helping or really encouraging folks to take the next step. So as we think about higher ed and the Unifying framework, we have a long ways to go here in Texas in providing just kind of that systems-wide articulation support that is flexible and student-centered and done in a meaningful way.
Thanks for that, Cody. I'm going to start kind of closing us out, but Krista, I have one thing, and then I'm going to have you lift this up as well in your final final closing thoughts. We talked a lot about various things today, and I know you are talking more to compensation. And in Texas, we don't have a state revenue, right? We have federal funds that come in to help our childcare system, but nothing else. Could you share at least one lesson with us from other states that we might be able to take some ideas from to tweak? And then also, could you give us a 30-second pitch of what you're going to discuss in your breakout group, because that's where we're going to be transitioning to.
Absolutely, Makia. So I'll go over more of this in my breakout group, but many states are using stabilization grants to encourage employers to raise wages or provide direct payments to educators. And in some cases, they're requiring a certain percentage of those funds go towards that purpose. And in other cases, they're offering additional money as an incentive for compensation. And in even other cases, we've seen examples of states paying employers by stabilization grants, but also specifying certain levels of money that has to be paid to teachers. So that sort of, and I'll go into more examples later. I'll jump to my pitch. There's more examples to come. But in the breakout session on compensation, I'll focus on compensation for the early education workforce, and I'll share some initial insights from 2 ongoing projects at our research center on educator compensation, with a particular eye towards promising strategies that states have been using to support the workforce using federal relief funds. So I hope you'll be able to take away some ideas or strategies that you can adapt to your role and context in Texas.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Krista. I'm going to go to Cody. Could you give us your 30-second pitch of what's going to be happening in your breakout?
Well, we're going to dive into all of the articulation challenges, but not just dwell on the challenges and really look at some bright spots around the state with some higher education faculty who are leading the way on creating student-centered articulation agreements between community colleges and four-year institutions.
Awesome. And then Marika, if you could let us know what's happening in yours.
Sure. The conversation about building a pipeline often segments and separates compensation from preparation. So I'm going to blend that a little bit, and it can also be daunting and overwhelming. So I'll focus on bringing some optimism and making change real from Washington, D.C. And just to be clear, I'm bringing optimism from the District of Columbia, not the other Washington, by highlighting the recent compensation win, where early childhood educators recently received $54 million exclusively for their compensation, but preparation and a pipeline was essential for that win.
Awesome. So as you heard, those 3 amazing breakouts are about to happen. Thank you so much, Krista, Cody, Marika. You guys are fabulous. I wish I could have stayed longer to chat, but we want to allow everybody to dive in and get into the topics. But again, we actually will debrief after your session. So I'll be back chatting with you for a little bit, and I'm going to pass it back to Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika, and our esteemed panelists, Cody, Krista, and Marika. You guys really hit home what the issues are, and they're big and they're complicated, and so we appreciate you kind of piecing them down for us as we continue our work here in Texas. Okay, so we're going to transition to breakout rooms. Here are the 3 breakout rooms. Shortly, a pop-up will show up, and you'll get to choose which breakout room you'll go in. So we've got Cody leading the higher ed and articulation with 4 faculty from across the state that are all doing articulation work in their communities, and they're all a little bit different. So we'll be able to kind of hear some lessons learned that way. Marika We'll be talking about that pipeline and really and some lessons learned from the District of Columbia, not Washington, D.C., not what Congress is doing, but what the actual community is doing in D.C. And then Krista will be working, talking about compensation and how do we tackle that big bucket. So we're gonna, all the breakout rooms are gonna be recorded. So you can choose one today and then you can go back and listen to the others that you want at a later time when we send out the links. But we are looking forward to it. So choose your breakout rooms and we'll see you back here in about 30 minutes. The breakout rooms are, if you click that button at the bottom, if you hover to the bottom of your bar, you'll see a breakout room and you can join which one you choose. And then we will, I think everyone's getting it now. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in mine and we'll see you back in about 30. All right, we're just waiting for everyone to come. All right, Mickey, I think you're going to lead us through a quick lightning round of recap of those great breakout rooms.
Yes, yes. Definitely. I tried to jump to each one to hear a little bit, but like drop some love into the chat for our participants and for the panelists. Like everybody was amazing. The conversation was so robust. So just definitely kudos to all of you who shared your expertise in those rooms. Definitely gathered a lot. I have a few questions for those who led those conversations in the group. So for this lightning round, I need Cody, I need Krista and Marika back so we can continue the conversation around what was shared. So let's see if I see. Cody, are you there? Okay, there you are, Cody. My first question is kind of for you to just wrap up this portion of our day. So there is a lot of conversation around articulation, agreements, what's currently happening, and how it plays such a significant role for early educators. What would you say is the first thing we must establish with higher education institutions across the state?
I'm going to steal something that Dr. Kwan shared in our breakout room, and we really have to start asking the question, why? Why is it the way it is? And we got to continue asking that question, why, until we get meaningful answers that are based off of the needs of students and the needs of communities. Because what's happening right now often is not guided by students and communities, but really just, well, it's the way it's always been. And we have to be also get comfortable with not being comfortable. And we have to think about, well, this is the way it's been, it's not working, so it doesn't need to be the way we continue to do what we're doing. And that's gonna require changes. It's gonna require changes at the institution levels, it's gonna require changes at the systems level. And we all have to be on board with it, so that way we have a better why behind what we're doing.
Thanks for that, Cody. And yeah, the why question, I think, Kim, you put like, just like the 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds always asking that question. And oftentimes you just find out it is because we always did it this way. So definitely there's a need for change. Krista, I was able to pop in for a little bit into your group. Very great conversation on compensation there and great questions. But you know, compensation is so complex. Just there's so much that goes into it and it's a problem we're trying to figure out and to solve. If you had that magic wand though, what would you do first to ensure that early childhood educators, no matter what setting or age group that they serve, were able to get a sustainable wage?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to shift from what I was going to say initially and say that it's really about this mindset and system level shift to embracing ECE funded as a public good. And then from there, making sure that specific funding is allocated to compensation. But really, we have to be comfortable engaging with conversations about why compensation matters and why ECE should be funded as a public good. That's a starting point. That's my magic wand. If we could shift everything and really also focus on equity, which I didn't get enough chance to talk about today, but truly engaging educators in this conversation so that we're elevating their needs as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely that's come up quite a bit today, that the public good, it's not necessarily seen that way and really shifting the mindset. I think the pandemic has kind of supported in that lens shift, but there's still a lot of work to do on what we can change in that area. And Marika, you have the final word for this portion of the day. Really just thinking about our early childhood education pipeline and then just thinking about our current workforce. But we're also now going to transition and really start thinking about that workforce for tomorrow, right? So the children that are in high school, elementary school, how can we both build the workforce for tomorrow, or those coming up into the field, and then also support the current workforce that we currently have right now?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have to do both. I don't think it's not even a choice. I think we absolutely can recruit and retain a diverse and competent workforce if we do the work. And that's all of us, again, those in the profession, those outside the profession. We have to create the conditions that early childhood educators need to support young children and families. I think in our breakout conversation, what was shared by Carol and Sarah and Paula and David, it is clear that early childhood educators love their work. They have a lot of professional pride. They want degrees and credentials. We just have not created the conditions to make that happen. And so I think our charge is to make sure we're creating the conditions to ensure that we can recruit and retain a diverse and competent workforce.
And thank you for that. That's the final word. I'm gonna leave it there. Again, just wanna show a lot of appreciation for Cody, Krista, and Marika today. You guys have been fabulous, and we've just really enjoyed your passion. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass it to Kim to continue on this discussion.
Thanks, Makia, and thank you, Marika and Cody and Krista. You guys have really, and I love the fact that we were able to really do those deep dives and give all of us an opportunity to really think about and ask questions and have a conversation. So appreciate you all for being here and your expertise. And Marika, to your point about really thinking about all of us, and not just the early childhood profession. And yes, we need to do that internal work and make sure that we are in that space to have those difficult conversations and be uncomfortable and articulate who we are and what we need. But also we know that we can't do all of it. And how do we shift that conversation to our larger community, that business community? And so we are going to go to our next panelist, round of panelists. So we're going to transition from this fabulous panel to our next fabulous panel. And Colby Mogan from the state director of our Texas Council for Strong America is going to lead the conversation about how do we really engage that business community, knowing that their work is, our work is instrumental to their work, that if without the early childhood workforce, there is no other workforce, and really have those conversations. So I think we're in the process of getting everyone unpinned and pinned. Here we go. As we have that continued conversation. All right. Colby, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Kim. So it's so good to be here today, and thanks so much to Children at Risk for all of these great discussions. Like Kim said, I'm Colby Monig, and I'm the Texas State Director for Council for a Strong America, which engages business, law enforcement, and retired military leaders who promote evidence-based policies and programs that enable kids to be healthy, well-educated, and prepared for productive lives. So delighted to be here today to facilitate what I'm sure is going to be a very informative and instructive conversation on the crisis in childcare and the perspectives of the business community. This is a very troubling subject and a very real crisis, and I know that our guests know a lot about this and have a lot of great ideas on what we can do. So let's get started. I'm going to briefly introduce our guests. Leela Melendez is the CEO of Workforce Solutions Borderplex. It's a Texas Workforce Commission Network partner. And over the last 2 years as CEO, she's led Workforce Solutions through a leadership change and a significant economic disruption with agility, innovation, and inspiration. And Leela has over 20 years of experience in El Paso's economic development landscape. Next is Jim Sperlino, who founded Sperlino Materials, a leading supplier of construction materials in the American Midwest. He's the author of a terrific book that came out last year, Business Bullseye, Take Dead Aim and Achieve Great Success. And he's a dedicated member of our board, Council for a Strong America, Ready Nation, a national membership alliance of over 3,000 business executives, building a skilled workforce by promoting solutions that prepare children to succeed in education, work, and life. And last, Nancy Fishman is my favorite colleague at Council for a Strong America, and she spent many years advocating for ECE. As the National Director of Ready Nation, she educates and informs executives, policymakers, and community stakeholders on critical workforce and economic development issues. So thanks to all of y'all for being here today. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. So our organization, a 2019 Ready Nation study examining the nation's child care crisis for infants and toddlers, so up to age 3, described the dire economic consequences of this crisis. So $57 billion in lost earnings, productivity, and revenue for the US. And the estimated cost for Texas alone is $4.9 billion per year. And COVID has almost certainly increased this economic burden. So over the first year of the pandemic, the number of childcare providers in Texas alone dropped by 16%. Texas's childcare workforce is at 84% of its pre-pandemic level. So that may sound like a manageable problem, but the pre-pandemic workforce level wasn't large enough to begin with. Prior to the pandemic, nearly half of Texas families lived in a childcare desert, where there are at least 3 children for every licensed childcare slot. So with all of that context, Leela, I'm going to start with you. Texas was hungry for more childcare workers before the pandemic, and now we've effectively have 16% less. So how can we address that problem?
Hi, everybody. So thank you all for including me in this very important conversation. And yeah, that number, when we think about our overall unemployment rates and we think about 16%, that's, tremendous. So when that's a big number that's making a crater into the industry. And yes, unfortunately, the childcare industry is in crisis. And I actually refer to the childcare industry as the first industry, because workers across all industries and occupations rely on childcare. Restaurant workers, retail workers, but also doctors, nurses, police officers, teachers, bus drivers, etc. So this industry needs to be not only stable, but well performing before any other industries can take off from there. So, and at the core of this issue is employment in a child care center. So how do we make it appealing to work in a child care center? Helping people, or I like to be around kids, is not enough to appeal to that workforce. We need to ensure that childcare workers have access to the same type of job environment they see that others are obtaining. And this is what has happened: is the workforce from childcare, really across all of the industries were unemployed during COVID, and folks are not returning to those original positions. And we're seeing all of these things happen in other industries, the bonuses and all of these changes happening, and maybe that's not happening in childcare, so they're not pulling back those workers. So I think it's going to require really a redesign from the inside out. It's not just one group's or one organization's problem to solve. The childcare industry can't and shouldn't solve this alone. We definitely need a partnership approach. State governments, local governments, industry, education, all of us. We need to meet childcare where they are, hear them out, get creative, test models, try again, and have more than one solution. There doesn't need to be just one way of running a childcare center, especially when you take into account that there are different types of childcare models. So we've got after school, home-based care, rural childcare, and care for shift workers that work those non-traditional hours into the evenings and maybe even overnight and on weekends. So each of these business models, let me say that again, business models require just as many unique components as the different families are also known as markets that they serve. So I think that those are going to be the things that we need to really brainstorm and get very creative here.
Yeah, Leela, and this is impacting women, and in particular, low-income women disproportionately. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. It is impacting women disproportionately, although this isn't a woman's issue. It's a family and it's an employer issue too. There are several factors that connect to this. So women are more likely to work in service jobs that can't be done remotely. Women bear the brunt of childcare responsibilities. So women are typically the first in the household to solve that childcare need, which in many cases has been that they provide the care themselves rather than working. So it becomes like, a choice. Do I do this or do I do that? And Texas, as a state, has seen a 36% increase in parents leaving the workforce due to childcare issues. Again, this goes back to, this isn't just a woman's issue. This is an economic and an employer issue. So, I've heard quite a bit, and we talked quite a bit about wages, really just across all occupations, but paying a worker is a great start. But if they don't have a reliable childcare center where they can spend that income at, then better pay isn't necessarily the answer for that employee. So I encourage employers to have conversations with their employees and future employees about the needs that can be accommodated to help them become and be good employees. What is that structure that workers need for their families that can allow them to contribute to productively to the business?
Great, thanks so much, Leela. So Jim Sperlino, here's another serious problem. The average annual cost of center-based childcare for infants in Texas is $10,826. Believe it or not, that's even slightly higher than the average cost of in-state public college tuition and fees, which is $10,810. We all need to work together to find a solution. So having to come up with the equivalent of college tuition for infants and toddlers is practically a non-starter.
And no question about it. It's interesting, Leela, you called this a business model. And just a few weeks ago, Nancy and I were on an email thread, and Nancy very, very accurately pointed out that this is an unsustainable business model, this childcare industry. And the thing that strikes me as much as anything about this is Krista Olson, who I was in her breakout room on compensation, and then in the follow-up, said there was the magic wand question, and she really hit it on the head. This isn't a business model of any sort that I've ever seen. I wouldn't even call this a business, and it shouldn't be. And the way we fund K through 12 publicly is exactly the way we ought to fund everything before K, because we all know, we know the science. We know 85% of brain development happens by age 3. We know kids are like sponges. The minute they wake up, they are absorbing, they're learning. And to tell you the truth, I wish it wasn't called childcare, because so many public officials just don't get it. They think childcare is babysitting. They don't understand that childcare is early education. It's early childhood education. And I think that when Krista talked about her magic wand, I totally agree with her, is that we've got to look at this differently. And just to give you a parallel example, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, does a number of different things in measuring population and children and learning and education. There's 38 nations that are a member of it. They're the most developed nations in the world. The average OECD nation spends $14,000 a year per child, 0 to 3. The US spends $500. That's less than 4% of the average, and we are literally the worst in the world. So if we wonder why we're having issues, if we wonder why we're not competitive in so many industries, if we wonder why our kids aren't graduating from high school at any higher rate than they did back in the 70s, and we're having problems finding employees that are qualified or want to work, or we have issues about even finding the service level type employees that we're looking for. We can point to a lot of reasons why we really don't look at this holistically the right way. And I think we've got to start talking about this is part of the education system. And when we fund billions and billions of dollars on Medicaid and Medicare and highways and all other public good type strategies and initiatives, this is exactly the same type of thing that ought to find a sustainable, publicly funded solution. And we ought to stop talking about it like we need a place to put our kids while we go work, as much as this is an important early childhood education issue, and treat it as such. And believe me, the cost is not just the issue. It's certainly, most childcare issues come down to affordability, access, and quality. But we solve the affordability issue, access and quality come along pretty quickly right behind it. And I think that's where we've got to really focus our attention to, because this is not going to get solved with COVID dollars that are one-time dollars, or hoping that somebody starts giving us $2 more an hour or $200 bonus a month. Those aren't solutions. That's not going to work. And so I think holistically, and I didn't mean to take off on a big holistic rant, but holistically, we've got to approach this a lot differently.
Wow, thanks, Jim. That was amazing points, and it really speaks to the workforce and the economy as a whole there. So Nancy, I'm gonna jump to you, and I've saved a particularly tough question for you. Texas has a quality rating and improvement system for childcare providers called Texas Rising Star, but only 30% of childcare providers serving children from low-income families are actually participating in Texas Rising Star. So tell us about the importance of quality from your perspective.
Thank you, Colby. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I think you now see why Jim is one of our biggest champions at Ready Nation. I am thrilled to be able to be on a panel with him. So beyond the negative consequences for the current workforce, including what Jim just mentioned, the lack of affordable childcare hurts the future workforce, which ties to Jim's comments about early education really matters. We see the greatest benefits from an education and workforce perspective from programs that are high quality designs. Those programs that don't have quality benchmarks don't have the same return on investment for the child, the family, and the economy. Studies demonstrate that the very first few years of life represent a critical window of opportunity for laying the foundation for skills building success. More than 1 million neural connections form every second, a period of brain development unmatched by any other. That statistic always grabs my attention. I can't even fathom 1 million connections a second, and just wanting to make the most of that time. We know that young children depend on nurturing, stimulating environments, both at home and in childcare, for healthy brain development. It's in a safe learning environment where children can interact with warm, responsive caregivers who help them explore that environment, that this time is especially important for infants and toddlers. They're the ones building those connections the fastest and developing the skills, academic and social emotional, believe it or not, even early on, that they will need for life. What happens without quality can really vary. One of the shortcomings in centers that lack quality are high rates of provider turnover. And this turnover can result in a lack of stable, consistent caregiving for children. We know that children need the stability to really stimulate their cognitive, social, and emotional development and set them on a path to productive adulthood. Decades of research have shown us the short and long-term benefits of high-quality early childhood programs for children's development along several dimensions. especially for children from families with low incomes. For example, a longitudinal study of more than 1,300 children found that children in higher quality childcare were better prepared for school at age 4 compared with children in lower quality childcare. At age 15, these children were still performing slightly above their peers. Colby, it's quality that's really making a difference for these children and their families.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Definitely quality is the focus here in Texas, and Texas Rising Star is a great way to do it. And so we're working really hard here in Texas to make sure that our providers are participating in the Texas Rising Star. So now this next question is for all of you. Ready Nation surveyed business leaders nationwide and asked them about ways that government could do more to encourage the business community to do more to help their workers access affordable, quality childcare. So more than 76% of the employers surveyed said that such incentives would increase the likelihood that their company would expand the childcare supports offered to employees. So what are some of the incentives that you think will work? Jim, let's start with you.
So that it's an interesting question, and it's easy to answer a survey like that and say, yeah, sure, we do more if we're incentivized, and it's about thinking more clearly about what does that mean, and certainly, I've seen a lot of the comments in the chat room, and I almost worried about being the businessman on the panel because I don't think there was very many positive comments about businesses and their outlook on childcare. But I can tell you, I don't blame or find fault with any of the comments. But from a typical businessman's perspective, you look at the current landscape, and unemployment is historically low and employers can't find workers. And when I talk to business groups, which I do a fair amount, there's not a single CEO in the last year and a half that had said to me his biggest problem is finding workers, finding employees for open spots. And they talk to me about idle equipment and unused capacity. So there's a place in there to find some motivation for these CEOs to actually step up a little bit. And in particular, most of the time businesses are going to respond to something that is going to benefit them some way. And so this is about probably mostly taxes and public policy and things like tax credits for dependent care accounts, tax credit for employer contributions to child care, raising the caps on pre-tax contributions, and even advocating for renewing the expanded child tax credit, which recently expired and Congress failed to renew, which is an amazing thing to me when it was proven to reduce child poverty by almost 30%. So we can't stop talking about those things. We can't let our public officials off the hook when they come up with a good idea and then fail to renew it despite the evidence. And certainly states can do things as well. The childcare system was really probably in crisis pre-COVID, and there's no question what it's done post. But incentivizing businesses to not only get started but to expand. States have funds for economic development that can help with that, particularly in these childcare deserts and low-income areas. Frankly, I don't see a need for any more 5-star childcare centers in really nice neighborhoods. That's not the problem. So I think it needs to be targeted for sure, and as well as offering training, particularly credits, tax credits for childcare workers. And for their placement and for relocation. We got to look at ways of making these jobs not just more attractive through compensation, which is a huge issue, which is why my earlier comments went to address that really on a holistic basis. But we got to look for a way to make it easier to grease those rails to get the workers where we need them and get them at the trained level that we need them. And there's no reason that we can't provide those kind of tax incentives for the childcare businesses as well as the businesses that need these employees, especially the employees with the children that need childcare.
Thanks, Jim. Great points. So Nancy, same question to you. What are some of the incentives that you think will work?
Many of the same things that Jim just mentioned. I mean, he mentioned that the federal component, obviously the state needs to do its share as well. States just have to continue to support investments in childcare, or the burden is going to get bigger on families. And families can't handle the current burden, let alone a larger burden. There are plenty of elected officials from both major political parties who understand this. We just need to get past party politics and push improvements in a bipartisan fashion across the finish line. I know that's really easy to say and very difficult to do. These sort of incentives and supports for businesses and for families are what's going to turn around the economy, going to help Texas and the country really be successful, both in the short term, but it's more than just the current workforce, as Jim said earlier, and getting parents to work right now. It's investing in our future. We're investing now in those young children who will someday take care of us when we're old. They're the ones going to be nursing us when we're in nursing homes. And boy, I hope they get a good education right now for selfish reasons, if not for moral and ethical reasons. We need people to be willing to see long-term. When you help a family afford childcare, you're helping a company have access to workers, and in the long run, you're strengthening the entire economy. I wish it was as simple as explaining that to people, but I truly believe that businesses, advocates, and the government working together can help us all get there.
Thanks, Nancy. And that's what we're doing here at Ready Nation. So definitely agree with all of those points. Leela, your turn. What are the incentives that you think will work?
Sure. I actually think, well, I'll speak to state and local policies. So, you know, the state, and Jim mentioned, the state has incentives for companies that move into the state. Similarly, cities and counties offer tax incentives or an incentive package for companies that move or expand in their communities. And I think those incentives policies are typically tied to a median county wage and employee benefits. So there are requirements of businesses to do that. So I think that those incentives policies and those benefits should include some kind of subsidy for childcare or somehow be linked as part of that. That needs to be in that formula at a local level and even at a state level for these types of incentives plan. I also definitely advocate, you know, cities receive CDBG funding. And so I'd certainly advocate for more of that funding and for strategic investment of CDBG, which is the Child Care Development Block Grant that provides subsidies to families with low incomes to help them pay for childcare. So I think cities can blend their CDBG childcare funds alongside those economic development incentives policies. Sometimes, and I think about here, my local community, those are in two different departments and they're siloed. I think you need to really bring them together and use them as very strategically and maximize those resources for a common impact that supports regional economies. So I think these types of solutions are what can, you know, regional economies are very unique across the state. And I think that these types of options at a regional, local level, using all of those state and federal resources and local resources and create some magic in your community that's relevant for your community and your economy and your population and the demographics that you serve. So I think it takes, I would encourage a regional focus on that versus strictly just a state or national approach to it.
Yeah, Leila, thanks for adding that regional perspective. It's really important to think about that. So we know that businesses alone cannot solve the childcare crisis, right? So almost half of Texas's employees, approximately 5 million people, work for small businesses that don't have the resources to meet their employees' childcare needs on their own. So let me ask each of you, do you think we'll make progress on solving this problem? Jim, can we start with you?
I sure hope so. I know we all get frustrated about the pace of change and progress, but it's something we can't give up on. It's something we cannot stop pursuing. States can actually, I think, make a big difference, and I'm kind of feel really good about seeing some states and some of the changes they've made. And I would encourage, any state, I would encourage Texas to look at some of the best practice states, kind of the leaders across the country, because you can always learn what they've done and what the results are. And in particular, you can find at the Prenatal to 3 Policy Impact Center's website. You can find quite a bit of information and kind of compare policies that different states have and how they're doing. The website is pn3policy.org, and you click on roadmap and you click on childcare subsidies, and you will find a ton of great information, kind of see where your state is. But in general, there's lots of pieces that obviously go into trying to make progress, but giving parents relief from, things like benefit cliffs and eligibility requirements, are certainly going to make a difference. It's going to improve access. We know improved access leads, to the ability of the parents to work, as well as increased earnings, which promotes sufficient family resources. But for the most part, some of the basic things around child care subsidies come right to the reimbursement rates and how they're set, and particularly whether they're using market rates and market surveys and estimates, and whether they're requiring low co-payments and low fees. And you'll see a lot of states, the leaders in our country, are paying well over 90% of the total costs. States like California, District of Columbia, we've had the speaker on, state of Washington, South Dakota, and New York are all paying well over 90%. A lot of states aren't paying anything close to that. And Texas, you're not keeping up very well with that. You're probably in the bottom 10th percentile in reimbursement rates. And that's something, where you can rally businessmen, you can rally advocates to talk to their public officials and get that changed, because it's about being competitive in a state. It's about being a prosperous state. And to be a prosperous state, you need to be competitive with other states in the country and your neighboring states, so that you want people that want to come in and live in your state, and you want businesses that want to come in and invest in your state. Those are the kind of structural things that need to get changed, really, to have the ability of Texas to succeed to the potential that it might have. And again, I would look to those resources to look at what other states are doing and how their policies are having a positive impact and really driving their state's economic activity forward. And I think we all can learn a lot by looking at those other leaders.
Yeah, and I know Texans don't like to be in the bottom tier of anything, so we should really get to work on that. And we are working on that. So thanks for that, Jim. Leela, same question to you real quick. What do you think, how we'll make progress on solving this problem?
Well, we have to fix this. We have to find solutions, but I don't think that there will be only one solution, nor should there be and I said this earlier, just one way of doing this. I'm an employer as well. I have my own labor force. I have a staff. I have contractors that I'm responsible for, and I've learned a lot on how to manage the needs of my labor force. And I think back to conversations that I had before COVID and how different those conversations are post-COVID. So our needs as society are ever evolving. So I have to keep an open mind, share ideas, be open and communicative with my staff and my employees, and be agile when developing solutions that work for us as an organization. So, we've at our organization, we have what we have to do. We know our service structure and our production and all of those things. So I know what my model is and the employees and the needs that I have to meet to get that done. That's very different from some of my peers and other businesses in the community and other employers. So, we share our best practices and we share the solutions that I've given to my staff and what I'm able to do with my resources and my funding to provide for those benefits to my employees. But that's not going to be the same solution for the next organization. So I think, but sharing those best practices, sharing those different ideas and concepts, and being open-minded to listening to and trying out those things that might work. I think that's where we are at this point is, let's put it all on the table and let's try something and, with the resources that you have and go from there. And I think it's going to be okay. And we should expect that it's not going to be just one size fits all and one solution.
Thank you, Leela. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and close. So thanks to all three of y'all for joining us here today and sharing your wisdom and your insight. We know our economy hinges on making childcare more accessible and affordable for families of young children. So both government and private sector employers have vital roles to play. Expanding public subsidies to families with low incomes will help access quality childcare for their choice. Direct assistance to childcare providers will enable them to develop much needed infrastructure. So Texas needs significant public investments like these to increase the supply of quality childcare. So thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us and staying on, and back to our esteemed MC Kim. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Colby, and thank you, panel, for that great discussion. I will, in the interest of time, I won't recap as Colby just did, but it is my honor to introduce to you all Commissioner Aaron Demerson. Commissioner Demerson is going to give us our closing remarks, and he is currently representing the commissioner representing employers at the Texas Workforce Commission. Governor Greg Abbott appointed him for a 3-year commission in August of 19 and was just reappointed in 2021. Commissioner Demerson serves as an advocate for over 620,000 employers and over 3 million small businesses. And Commissioner, I know you and your other commissioners have been great advocates for early childhood over the pandemic, and we thank you for your leadership and your compassion and your work in this area. So with that, I will give you the closing remarks.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for allowing us to close in remarks. First, I'll bring you greetings from the city of Waco, Texas, where we are actually at the Heart of Texas Workforce Solutions Center. And so similar to Leila's operation, we're here in Waco doing some phenomenal things here in our great state. What an exciting panel. Colby, you did a phenomenal job moderating that panel. The questions were going back and forth. I was listening to some of the comments and I wanted to jump in, and it's just a delightful conversation and a delightful opportunity. I have about 2 or 3 minutes to do the closing because you guys are going to get out of here at 11:30. Let me first and foremost say, Kim, you're right. We are a strong advocate and very passionate as it relates to childcare. We're doing some phenomenal things in Texas. Jim has set us up with a challenge. He wants us to look at some of the best practices that are out there, look at some of the best states in regards to what they're doing. And Colby kind of mentioned that Texans don't like to be last in anything. We don't like to be at the bottom of the barrel. And so we have the ability to do some amazing things. What I gathered out of a lot of this is basically we're going to convene. I have a roundtable coming together on June the 1st with child care employers here in our state. I represent the employers, and we're going to talk about the funds that are coming out, how they can best position themselves to be in the best position for success. And we're taking that very serious. And so convening is something that's going to be very, very important for us. You already had Representative Angie Chin-Button on the call as well. She's a firm supporter and an advocate. I've known her for a number of years and the work that she does. She's a Texan true and true, which means that we're not going to talk the talk. We're going to be about taking care of business. And so fact of the matter is that we are taking care of business. A session like the one that you guys have today is pretty phenomenal. And I really wanted to come by thanking a few folks, Sharon Watkins Jones, that kind of reached out to me in regards to what we're doing, but looking forward to working with you guys in ways that we can to make a difference. Also, a personal note of things. I have 2 boys. Came out of the child care system, Circle C Child Care Centers, where they went to school early on. And I remember that one, the Rocking Hearts, they went on a waiting list. And they followed, Matthew and Stephen both became a part of that. But that's where it started. They're today graduate, Stephen, SMU, undergrad and grad school, and then Matthew just recently at University of Arkansas. But it all started back at the Child Care Center. And so I want to say thanks to each and every one of you that are gathered here today for the work that you do day in and day out to make a difference in the lives of those that you're impacting. The work is very, very important. There are a number of groups that are actually taking a look at this. I'm looking forward to dealing with working with the employers to make sure that we're making a difference. The group 2036, I know they've looked at some things as well. And so we're going to be forward thinking in the way that we do some things. Yes, true. We have incentives that are located for folks that during economic development and the like. And I know with the brains that we have here in Texas, with the brains that we have in our United States, our country, we're going to be in a position to make a difference. And so I commend you on the work that you're doing. Know that we're here day in and day out. My other commissioner, Julian Alvarez, who represents labor, is a firm advocate, and the chairman, Brian Daniel, is a firm advocate as well. And Governor Abbott gives us the green light to take care of business. And so we need to take a common sense approach to doing what we need to do. Lastly, bringing together the words workforce, economic development, and education. Workforce, economic development, and education, coupled with elected leadership that gets it, we're well on our way to success. So Kim, thank you guys for the opportunity. I look forward to the continued discussions, and just the little bit that I saw here today tells me that you guys are doing some amazing work and you're well on your way. Kobe, I look forward to following up with you and all of you on the Texas spectrum. We look forward to collaborating, working together, and then reaching out, as Jim had mentioned, some of those states that are doing some things. We want to jump on top of that and see what we can do here in Texas. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the time, and congratulations on convening a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you again, Kim.
Thank you, Commissioner Demerson. We are so thrilled for you to be here, and we continue to look forward to continue to work with you. There are lots of providers in the chat that were very interested in your roundtables, so we'll try to do some follow-up on that. Thank you all for being here today. We are so thrilled that you joined us and have stuck in with us for a few minutes. Just a reminder, you can stay connected and get involved. Obviously, you can follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletters. There's also the Texas Family Leadership Council, which is a group, a statewide collaborative dedicated to using a unified voice to move the needle for Texas's families. We have an upcoming event, which I think Lindsay put in the chat earlier. If you like these summits, we are doing our next summit in June around immigration. So that will be a great discussion that I know our colleagues here at Children at Risk are working hard on. Just as a reminder, the recording, the PowerPoint, any of the links that were shared in the chat will be sent in a follow-up email. So stay tuned for that. Here's a quick survey. So if you can scan that with your phone quick and give us a quick survey, we would appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Stay cool out there. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.